From Meat Eater's World News Headquarters in Bozeman, Montana, this is Cal's Week in Review with Ryan Cal Callahan. Here's Cal.
Hey, all you Cal's Week in Review listeners. Cal the Wild. Feel like there should be like a there. Or maybe at this point in time with the state of current events, I don't know, what's the last song that they played on the Titanic? Anyway.
Celine Dion?
Oh, God. Hero for women of a certain age. That buttery smooth voice is Mark Kenyon of the Wired to Hunt podcast. And you are probably paying attention to old Mark these days because he's putting out a lot of really fantastic, well-researched conservation news through all of his channels. It's much appreciated. Mark Kenyon is currently residing in the great state of Idaho, working on a full-time move over there. But Mark and I just got done with a really spectacular trip to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. We were like crazy, spoiled kid stuff, asked to join a trip up there. Literally, the job was just to come see it.
Mm-hmm.
And spoiler alert, if you want to start an extractive business, you shouldn't go see this place, because if you do, you wouldn't do it. Like, it's a hard landscape to walk away from and think it doesn't matter. But we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the Roadless rule. We're going to talk about where we are right now with the public lands fight in the Senate, and probably a bunch of other stuff. So, Mark Kenyon, happy to have you on the show. What's happening, man?
Oh, man, I'm happy to be here too. And you're right. There's no shortage of stuff to talk about. It seems like every day there's some big new piece of news or some twist in the story. So yeah, we've got our hands full here, as does everyone who cares about these things.
And everyone is caring about these things. Like, one of the most, I was riddled with anxiety on that trip. I tried to give that trip away to everybody we know. Even though my sales pitch is like, I desperately want to go on this trip, but I just can't swing it. Please go on this and tell me all about it. And nobody took me up on it due to, family reunions and I don't know, kids being born and things like that. So, but I was so riddled with anxiety over the state of the potential loss of public lands that I didn't want to be disconnected from the world for a week, which is the exact opposite of how I am all the rest of the time.
I think what we learned, though, Cal, was that maybe you and I need to take off for these trips more often, because in the 5 days between when we left and went off grid to when we came back, a lot happened that was, largely positive, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a light switch all of a sudden like flicked, and that feeling of like shouting into the void, like, hey, this is happening. You can make a difference. You got to get active. This is real. And people being like, well, it's a nice day to fish. That kind of switched over to like, holy shit, it's in my backyard. Wilderness Society released those maps. That was a huge catalyst, I believe, because all of a sudden people were like, oh my God, hunters love reading maps, right? They're like, this is real. I recognize some of these spots. We just came out of a BHA board meeting. One of our board members, James Brandenburg from Arkansas, was like the spot where I learned about public lands. They were on a family road trip to Colorado. the kids needed to stretch their legs. They went out and they were hiking around. They kept seeing these signs being like, your public lands, your public lands. And one of his kids was like, Dad, what is public land? And he had to Google it.
Wow.
Right. And ever since then, he was like, I cannot believe we have this and have access to this. And ever since then has been like kind of an evangelist for public lands. That spot is up for sale. Right. And thousands and thousands of stories like that, because the sales pitch out of Senator Mike Lee is like, oh, these places aren't iconic landscapes. They don't matter. They're low value. Garden variety, right?
Uh-huh.
And to somebody who doesn't leave DC and only cares about the machinations of the federal government and how to divest people of something so valuable to the rank and file of America, they don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's like a hard thing with certain people is this particular individual, Senator Mike Lee out of Utah, like he is a true believer in the fact that land is only valuable once it's lost its ecological value. Like the things that people who care about hunting, fishing, wide open spaces care about. Once those things are gone, then that land is living up to its true potential, which is, producing income. But it's like, where do we get our food?
Yeah. So many questions there. I felt the same way though when I saw that map, because I saw a mountain that was right next to the mountain that I killed my first elk. I saw a piece of national forest where my kids had their first backpacking trip ever. I saw the place that I went for a trail run the day before I saw that map. So that definitely hit home for me too. It's amazing the breadth of possible lands that were, up for grabs in that sale. Now it does sound like things are changing now, hopefully. But I'm sure we'll cover that in more detail. But there's a lot in flux right now, and largely because of, there's some rule type stuff that's dictating some of this, but then there's also no doubt about it, like public pressure is making a difference right now.
Yeah, and we're seeing the things that we know to be true, but for whatever reason weren't being talked about out in the open, which is this stuff belongs to everybody. It matters to everybody. And what I'm seeing is the belly of the bell curve of America. The sometimes pot-bellied belly of the bell curve of America is saying, oh, that stuff matters. It's ours. It is benefiting America as is. And as we talked about a lot, right? Like this is the stuff that families can access, that people can access before, after work, or over their lunch hours. It's the stuff that you can quickly get to for a short weekend. And what happens when all that front country's gone? What happens to the back country? We just penned a letter on behalf of hunting specific businesses that released today. I think we're calling it like the Hunt Brands Coalition. Just stating like the clear economics of what will happen to hunting industry brands. This includes firearm ammunition manufacturers if we lose access to places, right? And it's like every season is somebody's first season and somebody's last season.
Mm-hmm.
I put it in terms of bird dogs. Like you're bringing on a new puppy and you're doing that last retirement hunt with an old dog. Then that happens every season. Every season is critical. And when we remove access, like we know this is not hyperbole, it's an absolute fact. Access is the thing that brings people in to hunting and fishing, and it's the thing that closes people out. It's the thing that makes people hang up their waders and shotgun straps and say, you know what? It's too much of a pain in the ass anymore. So it impacts all around, man.
And I think that's a big part of why this has been, this is broken out of some of the usual patterns that you see when it comes to some issues related to public lands or wildlife or the environment. We're starting to see people speak out on this that maybe traditionally haven't. We're seeing some brands and some individuals who maybe have been, resistant to criticizing some of the things happening in recent times, all of a sudden saying, okay, yeah, this is something we all need to speak out on. So you're hearing pushback on this from, Republicans, Democrats, and everyone in between. I mean, this is as bipartisan of a pushback as you could ever ask for. And I view that despite a lot of this stuff being really concerning, the one silver lining I see out of this is that it's showcasing the influence and the impact that we can make when it comes to, standing up for public places, wildlife, wild places, the impact we can have when we do this across the party divide, when we can kind of bridge the gap between left and right or hunt and fish and, REI crowd. When these parties and groups come together on some stuff that we have shared interest in, we can change things. We can move the needle. And that is encouraging.
It is. And I think, Republican elected officials are starting to understand that if they sit back and let Mike Lee represent the entirety of the Republican Party, that's not a winning strategy.
No.
That's a losing strategy.
Yeah.
And for everybody else, there is a version of this where if you didn't speak up over and over and over again, we were going to lose something, right? So, there's a lot of versions of this, right? And we talked in the conservation space, and that's like conservation organizations as well as motivated individuals who are willing to speak out about this stuff and catch some heat for it, right? It's pretty funny how this conversation turned from like an anti-Trump conversation to a pro hunting, fishing, public land, public access, outdoor recreation argument, which, big shocker, everybody across the political spectrum is in favor of, right?
Yeah.
Like, we need our access, we need our open spaces. It's been interesting to see how this ball has moved, right?
Yeah. So, Cal, do you think, do you want to get folks up to speed on what has just come out as of last night or this morning, at least as of us recording this? Because, while we were in Alaska, the Senate version of the bill became widely understood by folks. That's when really the opposition became kind of viral. When we got back, we got news that the senators from Idaho were coming out against it. Some continued public comments of opposition from your senators there in Montana somewhat. And then just last night / earlier this morning, we got another piece of big news. Is now the time to kind of explain that?
Yeah, we can do that. We need to talk about like the fun, amazing stuff of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge too. So, very succinctly, the ball is in the Senate's court as far as like the budget game. So all your state senators are working on their individual pieces of this budget pie. Senate Energy Natural Resources Committee, chaired by Mike Lee, had put together a plan. Mike Lee slid in his public land sales provision, which was dumping gasoline on a raging fire, very divisive. It's becoming more and more clear that there wasn't room for compromise on this. It also turns out as of last night, it was determined to be in violation of the bird rule, which it is the bird rule, but I think just for funsies, it's when things are subject to the bird rule, it's referred to as the bird bath. And, I'm not an expert on this one, but essentially what it is when one party controls the House and the Senate, you need fewer votes to get things done. It's like a easy ticket to ride. The bird rule comes in to make sure that things can't be passed because there is this concentration of power that aren't specific to the budget process. So
Yeah.
it's super efficient because the Republicans in this case have the House and the Senate, but that's not like a ticket to steal type of thing, right?
Yeah.
You can't just jam everything in because you're conveniently passing something like the budget. So in this case, Mike Lee's public land sell-off was found to be in violation of the bird rule, and that, as well as Ambler Road, were removed. It was leaked that they were removed last night. It was confirmed early this morning. And that's great. However, it's not done yet. None of the language is set. We haven't seen the text yet.
Yeah.
And right now, Mike Lee is running around like his head's on fire and his ass is catching, as the man once said, to try to make as many allies as he can on revised language of land sell-off. So he kind of went for like, to any reasonable person, what would be like the whole enchilada, millions of acres of public land being sold, to a much smaller version where he's trying to make possibly primarily Bureau of Land Management lands only for sale within a certain radius of previously existing infrastructure, towns, municipalities, which is a more reasonable approach. So reasonable, in fact, that through FLIPFA and FLIPMA, those types of land sales are already provided for.
You already could. Yeah.
Yep. And FLIPFA and FLIPMA, and I don't want to bog people down in acronyms, but the big thing that you need to know is these are small documents that are basically put together to tell the American taxpayer what the value is of that tract of land. So we know if we're getting a fair deal by selling it off. And then in those provisions, that cash, the revenue generated from those sales, would go back into finding land, replacement land, possibly not of equal acreage, but of higher strategic value. So Mike Lee is just trying to get his dream accomplished at the expense of the American people. What he says this is for is already provided for in a way that the American taxpayer has already voted on. We've already signed off, stamped on. It's been subject to public approval. And it's one of those things. It's not perfect for everybody, but the American voter approved of this, and it passed, and it exists. The legal framework exists. And it is not in this budget process where revenues do not go back to the American people. They go into this empty frickin' debt void bucket that not a single person on the planet or in the United States of America will ever feel. It is gone, and we will not see the benefit of it.
Yeah.
Strong words, I know, but I mean, it is just the frickin' reality, kids.
Well, appropriate. I got to ask you this question, though. So in the tweet that Mike Lee sent out recently, overnight, I think it was, talking about the changes he's going to try to make in his new version to try to pass the bird rules.
Yep.
He mentions, as you alluded to, he's going to remove all of the Forest Service lands from the sale.
No, Mark. You missed some key language there. He said, I won't sell our forests. And when the hell did Mike Lee start considering any of this public land as ours?
That is funny. That's funny. He's conveniently trying to become a user now.
Right.
Which there's an amazing, this is a total off topic, but there's a great article that does a deep dive into how the state of Utah hired a PR firm to help them develop their language and their strategy for pitching the land sale or land transfer movement. And part of it was using language from Randy Newberg and other people in the hunting industry
And
how we
BHA.
talk about in BHA, and
Yeah.
analyzing it to learn, okay, this is how they're talking about it. How do we use their language and kind of co-opt that language to get those same people to believe us instead?
Yep.
Can you believe that shit?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've been talking about it for a long time, right? So, I mean, we got to remember, like, the Utah part of this started with a case that they tried to expedite to the United States Supreme Court
Yeah.
to steal our BLM land,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah, but let me get to this. Okay, so he says they're going to get rid of the Forest Service lands in the sale. They're going to significantly reduce the amount of BLM land to just lands within 5 miles of population centers. But here's the one that gets me, that I'm just curious about, if you know anything about this. He says they are going to, in this new version, they're going to establish freedom zones to ensure these lands benefit American families. What the hell are freedom zones, Cal?
So freedom zones come from this like tech world. God, there's kind of like some libertarian notion here. There's kind of some, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like rooted in anti-government, but like freedom cities were a buzzword under the previous Trump administration, and that's where that language comes from. So basically, it's like an autonomous zone. Ask the city of Seattle how that worked out for tech folks with big money to come in and do whatever the hell they want. But their pitch is it's going to be like, the ultimate city because it's built, by tech oligarchs, basically. They use different words, if you can imagine that. So,
I can. Well, that sounds terrific.
Yeah, and what's amazing to me, right, is any contractor in any of these states could sit down and write a reasonable, affordable housing development plan. And that is one thing we have not seen this dude do. So if it's about affordable housing, where is the affordable housing plan? Like it doesn't exist because that is not what this is about. Why? Because that is already provided for. Like Biden sold off some big chunks that actually got ultimately sold under Trump, but that was something that was rubber stamped under him. Back in, I want to say the 70s, we had another Nevada version of FLTFA, and then what a lot of folks, because it is political and therefore full of screw yous and rage, is, part of Harris's plan, had she been elected, was to continue some sales in Nevada, right? However, those are done under the legal framework that already exists in a way that actually has benefit to the American people.
And some guardrails, right?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. So
yeah, so a lot happening right now. And a lot still TBD, right? Like we're waiting to see the real final language of whatever this new version is. We're waiting to see, I know that Ambler supposedly struck out of this, but there's possibly new language around stuff from the Western Arctic. And we still don't know about Arctic National Wildlife Refuge stuff 100% yet. All sorts of news on so many fronts.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing. It's a game of whack-a-mole, political strategy. Like, you're not going to be able to get them all. The reason that we bring up Boundary Waters, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or what is it, National Petroleum Reserve
National
area,
Petroleum
NPRA.
Reserve, Alaska. Yeah.
Alaska, yeah. Oak Flat, all these places, is because they're incredible. And specifically where you and I were at, man, like, where the hell is Ducks Unlimited on that?
Oh, I know.
I mean,
There's
yeah. So the Arctic Plain is a giant nesting ground, and literally birds from all over the world. And when I say all over the world, every place other than Australia will come and stop over on the Arctic Plain.
in all 50 states.
In all 50 states. This is a duck and goose production factory. It's one of those places that is so far flung, it's out of sight and out of mind. However, like, my observation is, man, pretty damn easy to get there. I left Missoula, Montana like 7:15 p.m. and was up in the Brooks Range at like 3 p.m. Alaska time the next day.
Yeah.
So it's inconvenient, but it's right there too. Like, you can get there fast, and it's staggering. It's beautiful.
Would it be helpful for me to give like a very fast rundown of like what this place is history wise and scale?
Oh yeah, man. Lay it down.
Because I feel like even
the man with the folder.
The man with the full. I literally do have like a 4-inch thick binder that we got on this trip that I'm very excited about. But yeah, so this place, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, it was established in
Hang on 1 second. Can you hear that dog?
Yeah, I can hear snort. Yeah.
Trace, enough. We're gonna keep this in, Phil. That's called discipline.
All right, so the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It was originally established in 1960 by the Eisenhower administration by way of many years of folks advocating for it. Folks like Olafs and Marty Murray, who are well-famed in Wyoming and many parts across the country. Aldo Leopold advocated for it. Bob Marshall advocated for it. Whole bunch of folks that are pretty well known in the conservation world still to this day. But 1960 it was officially created, and it was made about 9 million acres were established as a refuge at that point to be protected for wildlife habitat. Fast forward another 20 years, and in 1980, the Carter administration had this huge bill passed. It was the Alaska National Interests Lands Conservation Act, I think. And that is what established many of the national parks and wildlife refuges and wilderness areas in Alaska. And what that one did is it doubled the size of the refuge. So it was now about 19 million acres as of 1980. But they had to make a kind of a little compromise concession there to get that bill passed on that front. And what it did is that it set aside a big chunk of the refuge as wilderness, but a 1.5 million acre section of it, known as the coastal plain, was to be studied for future decisions on whether it should be preserved as wilderness alone or if it could be open to oil extraction in the future. And so that 1.5 million area, the coastal area, or some people refer to as the 1002, that is what I'm sure we'll get to. That's this kind of contended part of the refuge. And to your point, this nearly almost 20 million acre piece of public land, it's, I think, the second largest piece of public land in the nation, second to only the Western Arctic, that National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. That's the largest. This is, I think, the second largest. As you mentioned, the coastal plain is like a duck and bird factory, migratory birds from all over the world. The largest caribou herd left in the world is here. There's muskox, there's polar bears, the largest inland denning site. The most inland denning sites in Alaska exist here for polar bears. There's grizzly bears, wolves, muskox. Did I mention muskox? And Lord knows how much else. I mean, it's vast, it's huge. There's the Brooks Range Mountains, as you mentioned, and then this coastal plain ecosystem. So several very different kind of landscapes that provide this diversity of habitat that leads to the vast wildlife. And the final thing I'll say is that people often refer to this as the American Serengeti. Like, this is our version of the African Serengeti. This is this vast ecosystem where there are huge sprawling herds of wildlife still migrating across the landscape. This caribou herd moves something like 2,700 miles a year as it travels across the refuge into Canada and back. So, we've got something on scale here, on par here, with anything else in the world. And it's pretty amazing that, to your point, that's here in our country. That's, to some degree accessible to us as Americans. And man, like you said, we were just spoiled kid, lucky to get to see it and experience it ourselves. But it met and maybe exceeded all expectations I had, because it's somewhere I've read about, I've watched films about, I've dreamed about for years. To finally see it in the flesh was transformative.
I had like two, very like emotional points. Like I have literally constructed my life with many sacrifices, uh, relationship wise, financial wise, uh, over the course of my life, to stay outside as much as possible and be in wild places. Um, I'm easily impressed, but the Brooks Range, I was told ahead of time by a good backpacking buddy of mine, old Brad Brooks, that it was one of the most impressive places he's ever been. Possibly the most impressive place he's ever been. And I was really blown away. But there were two times where I literally had, knots in my guts, and um, just like a heavy emotional thoughts, which one, I'm going to do this in reverse order. One was flying from our first camp, which would be, in general terms, would be on a southern portion of the porcupine caribou herd migration. We flew literally on the same path as the caribou that were coming through camp, um, over several mountain passes to what I would call like the gates of the mountains, where a short hike from camp number 2 brought you onto the coastal plain. And if anybody's been in eastern Montana driving west towards like Glacier National Park, we talk about the Rocky Mountain front, or the front. And it's this severe landscape where it is high prairie, and then it just hits these walls of mountains. And this is similar to that, not the same, but very similar. And on that flight, following these ancient caribou paths, I just didn't expect the valleys to keep going. Like, the scale and complexity of the landscape was so immense that, when I've spent a ton of time in the Frank Church and the Bob Marshall here in the lower 48. and they're hemmed in by like man-made boundaries, right? It's like got Highway 93 on the east side, you got Hell's Canyon on the west side, but there's all these highways and dirt roads in between. Highway 12 to the north, you got, civilization. Stanley, Idaho is like the little tip of the Frank down there on the south end. And then the Bob Marshall Wilderness has just like a brutal, complex checkerboard of private land on the east side that's getting worse and worse and constricting access. You got Glacier National Park on the northwest side, Marias Pass. You got the Mission Valley that's populated. You got the Blackfoot corridor that's a huge recreation corridor. Essentially, like it's rung with people, right? And I can look at those maps and be in those places, and I've spent a ton of time in there, and they're beautiful and immense on their own, but they are peopled. They're way more people than we were. And I can look at those maps and be like, oh, yeah, I can hoof it out of here. I can hunt it this way. I can break it up in these ways. Flying through those mountains and looking at the way that each valley didn't end. Like it kept turning and twisting and going on out of sight or culminating in this giant glacial ice cap in a mountain to climb that led to another valley. It just kept opening up and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it wasn't rung by civilization. Like there's points of contact, there's airstrips and small communities and an ocean, but you couldn't walk out of there. And where I started to just kind of get panicky and sad is the fact that I looked at that stuff and it was so, it was calling me, right? Like I wanted to go there. I wanted to explore. I wanted to see it all. And as a 42-year-old man, it was just smacking me in the face that I could spend the rest of my life up there and not scratch the surface. And the reality is I could be born up there and live it and breathe it every day and not scratch the surface. Mm-hmm. But it was conflicting because I was like, oh, I shouldn't even start. I shouldn't even be here. It's too good. It's too awesome. It was like, it was just a lot to take in. And I just haven't had that feeling before. And then the other time that like I just had a what the hell type of moment was we hiked up to that peak above camp and we were aware of this gimmick, right? This for sale sign that Lily in our crew had brought up specific for this point.
Yep.
But she was pissed about having to haul it up there and nobody liked the idea and it was a gimmick and we climb up onto this peak and we're looking around at this awe-inspiring landscape and I throw up the binoculars and I look down at camp and I'm like, oh, the for sale sign is up. And she had brought like your cookie cutter white vinyl for sale sign. Property 21, Remax, name whatever real estate company you can think of. They use those signs. They're ubiquitous. You know them. You see it. You're like, oh, that is a for sale sign. That's a real estate sign. And she has got this thing staked out. And I just, I was like, oh, Lily's got the for sale sign up. And then I kept looking at it and I was like, oh, that really makes me feel something here. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, it was like a mix of betrayal and certainly pissed offedness, but I think mostly like betrayal. And maybe that comes from like a lifetime of underappreciating public lands. And then all of a sudden you're slapped in the face with like, oh yeah, they're going to take it away. You just saw this briefly, but we're going to sell it. Right.
Yeah.
And then we hiked off that mountain, got back to camp, and that for sale sign's still up. And those feelings didn't go away. If anything, they got more complex and stronger. But it was just like an unexpected, very visceral, real reaction to something that wasn't a surprise. Like, we knew that the gimmick was going up. We packed it with us. But then seeing it on the landscape was horrifying.
What made it feel a whole lot more real. I mean, this proposal, all these, it's not like this is new. Different versions of this have been proposed repeatedly over time, but now this latest one seemed even more threatening than ever. And then to see a place that's so amazing, and then to see that physical representation of this god awful idea right there, yeah. I mean, it's like hits you in the face, attention grabbing, and I don't like it either. That's for sure. I did not. You know the emotional moments, Cal. I had one of those too, and I felt the same two things you mentioned. But I had another really strong moment for myself, which was when we got to Camp 2, which is the one that you described there that was near the coastal plain, and we all set up our camps, and then kind of people went off in their own direction. You went off looking for a moose paddle to the south. I headed to the north, and I climbed up on top of this knob that was right on the edge of the coastal plain, and climbed up there by myself about 3 miles from camp, and got to really see the coastal plain for the first time. And so you could see, like you mentioned, this like big, wide open, grassy plain. You can literally see 20 some miles all the way to the Arctic Ocean. You can see the pack ice. So like all this huge frozen white pack ice expanse across the ocean there. And then to either side, to the east and west, you're just seeing this never-ending grassland. And you can literally see, I mean, I don't know, I knew it was like 22 or 25 miles to the ocean to my north, and I could see at least maybe 3 times that far to the east or west. So I don't know, 60, 70, 80 miles, maybe more to the east or west. And as far as you can see, it is this unbelievable wild expanse that, is populated by caribou, muskox, bears, all the things that we talked about at the beginning. And I remember just sitting there and just being so in awe of that landscape, so appreciative that we still have a place like this, but then also simultaneously struck by the very real possibility of that changing in the relative short term. And this is the first time in my life that I've been somewhere where I could see something so tangibly that might be dramatically different in a number of years. Because this coastal plain, as I mentioned, that's the 1.5 million acre section that they've debated over decades about whether or not to open that to oil leases. And in this reconciliation bill right now being debated, if it were to pass as the language is in there currently, it would mandate opening the refuge to oil drilling. It would fast track that process. And it could lead, as we talk to these people who have, deep experience with this, it could lead to, in a matter of a handful of years, this wide open, incredible wildlife habitat becoming vastly different. In 5 years, maybe, if this passes as it's written right now, we might go back there in 5 years and see instead industrial corridor built across the plain, oil rigs, gas flares, housing for workers, semi trucks, Lord knows what else. I mean, this just unbelievable wilderness resource could be dramatically different. And I sat there on top of that mountain looking down on that thinking, number one, this is amazing. Number two, I want my children and other future generations to be able to experience this. And number three, the real slap you in the face reality that might not be possible. And as I sat there and contemplated all that, I had a very real emotional response to that. It was daunting. It was both inspiring to see what's there now and really discouraging to consider what might be there someday. And I've never seen that contrast so starkly and in such a real way right in front of my face like I did then. It was
It's almost like you know what I was saying about every hunting season's a little puppy bird dog's first season or a old bird dog's last season. And
yeah,
it's like we were having both of those seasons at the same time,
that's a great
right? It's
point.
like
Yeah,
here's this place. You even if you come back, you'll never see it the same way again if this development goes through. And folks, I'm a total realist. I burn a shitload of gas. Um, so much of my life comes out of the ground in one way or another, as does yours. The fun fact is we don't need these resources. Not right now. They are safely underground in ultimately one of the most valuable resources underneath one of the most valuable resources this planet has right now, which is wide open space that hasn't been developed. Like this is something that is only going to go up in value forever and ever. And the world at large is losing these landscapes at an incredibly fast rate. Like we don't understand the value of these places, not in the context of our time here on this planet. I can confidently tell you that. I mean, just one fun fact to noodle on is once the snow and ice melt has run off, all the fresh water up there, of which there is an unbelievable amount, and it's tasty. Um, it's 1,000-year-old water by the time it bubbles up to the surface out there on the Arctic plain. So um, the water that seeps in, leaches in to the tops of those mountains, and gets down into the aquifer is 1,000 years old. 1,000-year-old snowflakes and raindrops by the time it bubbles up on the surface of that plain. So you're literally, um, drinking the water that fell on some poor hunter's shoulders 1,000 years ago. Got brushed off a muskox back 1,000 years ago, which is wild to think about. And if you can put things in that context, there's so much more that we obviously do not know. I mean, we're dealing with timelines on landscapes that we just don't quite have the capacity to understand right now. So um, I push back on the development of these places because I think, or maybe naively want to believe, that if we keep working on our development technology, that one day we'll be able to extract from these reserves when we absolutely need them and in a way that does not impact the landscape. Certainly not in a way that's going to like quite literally kill off the last remaining healthy-ish caribou herd
right.
or untold amounts of migratory birds.
And that's the thing, Kale's like, even if we were to, like, to your point, we need resources. We need these things. I understand that. But aren't there some places where maybe it's not the right place or the right time to do it, especially these last pristine few places, which to your point are one of the rarest resources left and will only increase in that value. As I understand it, there's somewhere between like 6 and 10 billion barrels hypothetically underneath the coastal plain, which I'm going to get the specifics here wrong, but I think I remember reading something like that would only account for enough oil to be used in the United States for 6 months to a year. And
And those, we don't know that,
it's
right?
all
That
hypothetical.
it's hypothetical. We don't know what those reserves are. The speculation is that if it was really worth getting, it already would have been got at this
Right.
point. And just the exploration practice is pretty brutal on the landscape as far as the impacts of the great term here, thumper trucks,
Right.
going across the tundra and doing the seismic readings to determine what's in the ground.
And so
As
that's
Mark mentioned, the infrastructure needed to support people doing the work, and then the reality is like this stuff where it's at has got to be subsidized by the U.S. government in order to make it profitable for the companies that want to do the extraction. So it's like robbing Peter to pay Paul, and nobody has been able to explain this to me in a way that it actually makes sense, fiscal or otherwise. If you can, man, guest number one at the top of the show. I would love to learn more and hear it. But that's the whole point of doing these moratoriums in my mind. The Boundary Waters moratorium, which is something we need to talk about too, is like, it's a 20-year moratorium. Use that 20 years to show me a better plan that's not going to have tremendous downstream effects that would negate any sort of fiscal positive you could pull out of this project. And we'll talk about it then,
Well, it's because with all these things, Cal, especially up in the Arctic, it's a short-term resource extraction opportunity, in this case, hypothetically, but a nearly forever impact on the landscape. So it's not one of those things that you can we'll do it for a little bit and we'll turn it back to how it was. That's just not possible. And so you're getting a short-term benefit at the price of an extremely long-term cost on those other fronts. That's a really questionable swap as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. The reasoning for the timeline, right? Like, doesn't exist. I don't know what the rush is for.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. It almost seems like everything we've read so far and talked to folks have said, they've echoed what you just mentioned, which is that the economics of drilling in this particular place right now are just not there. Like, it doesn't make sense from a financial perspective, but politicians continue to pursue it regardless. And it almost seems like it's become more of like a trophy, like a political football thrown around, and folks just want to open it up and make it happen to say they did it, or to spite the opposition, to spite the greenies or the environmentalists or whatever you want to call anyone that supports this area. So it feels almost spiteful in that way, given all of that. And like you said, like, if they were to do it, there's rumors and talk of, if this gets passed, the government will simply subsidize and or influence even foreign companies to invest and do this kind of stuff, just because they want to get it done, even though it's not profitable. So, yeah, for so many reasons, it seems like a bad idea to me. Even more so now that we've actually experienced what it's like now.
Absolutely. And it's those economic facts, right, of that landscape is tremendously valuable. It's only going to go up in value as is. There's already, I can't remember how many businesses. There are already a lot of businesses up on that landscape operating for different industries and capacities, including what we'd call recreation, right? Like flying people in to check birds off the birding list, hunt all sorts of species, climb, ski, pack raft, fish. And those dollars that are collected and then redistributed by the local businesses are recirculated on average between 3 and 5 times. And whereas the extractive industries, when they go in there, the bulk of that wealth is literally shipped off with the oil. Like those are extractive dollars that do not circulate over and over in those communities. And when you try to balance out the wreckage that landscape is going to cause and the timeline in which the profitability will be in effect, I guess you'd say, it just paints like a really bleak picture of like what the hell our goals are.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, Kel. I've, I know you've dove into this a lot yourself, but I've read like extensively into the history of our public land system, how we got these places, all of the conservation history that led us to this point. And every decade, every single year since we first established the early parts of our public land system, every year since, there have been debates and arguments over the same set of issues, the same ideas. Like, we want to take out resources or we want to conserve these places. And the same general things have been argued over and over and over and over. When you look back at every one of the battles within this fight that conservationists have won, every one of these places we have been able to protect in some kind of way or conserve in some kind of way, every single one of them, you look back on it now and folks look back on it, they say repeatedly, oh my gosh, how did we ever consider losing Mount Denali in that area? Or, oh my gosh, we are so lucky that we still have the area around the Tongass. They were trying to raise it to the ground. They were trying to, just cut every single thing. Oh my gosh, how lucky are we that we have the Bob Marshall Wilderness or Glacier National Park? Can you imagine life without Yellowstone or all these different places? Back at the time, there were so many business interests that said, this is crazy to set this stuff apart. This is a land grab. This is nuts. You guys are crazy. We need to take the resources. We need to extract the oil. We need to cut the timber. We need to do whatever it is. And they painted the conservationists or preservationists as nut jobs. But then 50 years down the road, you look back and everyone says, thank goodness we protected this spot. It's so valuable. It's so special. It's so worthwhile. And I think that's going to be the case now. These last few places that we have like this, we're never going to get them back if we sacrifice them now. And 50 years from now, when my kids are, raising families of their own, they're going to look back on this and they're either going to say to themselves, man, I'm really proud of my dad and his friends and his, cohort of people in that generation who stood up and protected these places. This is that now in 2070, we still have around and people can appreciate and value as so special and rare. Or they're going to look back on this and say, geez, they took their foot off the pedal. They didn't live up to Roosevelt and Pinchot and Grinnell and Leopold. I don't want that to be the case.
No. And I don't understand why there's like this attempted fire sale on our natural resources right now when it's evident, like the world over, so much of our models of extraction, land use, and land management are so highly regarded. And right now, it's like we're trying to tear them down. When you bring up the Tongass, right, it's like we got to talk about the Roadless rule, which you should probably take the lead on this one. But for folks who don't know, the Roadless rule pertains to I think it's 58 or 59 million acres of ground in the U.S. And that rule has been an impediment to certain extractive industries, mining and logging being really like the top two. I will point out that I had a buddy that used to work at Midas Gold there out of Yellow Pine, Idaho, and we used to roll up there for the Yellow Pine Harmonica Festival. If you've never been, it's pretty darn sweet. Used to have a honor bar, so you could grab beers out of the fridge and stuff some cash. Anyway, they were in a roadless area, that mine, but they would, when the price of gold was high enough, they would just mine with helicopters. So they would roll crews in with helicopter, drop everybody off, do the work, and then take the ore out and the personnel at the end of the day via helicopter. So a roadless rule didn't stop everything, but it did force industries to extract in other ways and sometimes much more costly. But Mark, do you want to tackle the roadless rule?
Yeah. So starting in the 1930s, Cal, folks like Aldo Leopold and Bob Marshall started looking at our National Forest Service lands and saying, wow, they are getting carved up to pieces right now. The last few places that we have, even in the 1930s, they were beginning to realize this. These last few places that do not have roads provide this unique value that probably should be protected now, because everything else is getting very quickly kind of developed in one way or another. So starting then, they began a process within the National Forest Service of inventorying the last remaining roadless areas. And they started designating them. There was like L2 and L1 lands within the Forest Service were kind of like de facto wilderness. Those areas were kept track of and getting some special protections until the 60s, when the Wilderness Act came into play. And that is when some places within the Forest Service and other public lands were designated as like capital W wilderness, which meant, hey, no motorized vehicles, no development, etc. But then there still were other lands, specifically within the Forest Service, that were inventoried as roadless, but not yet protected with capital W wilderness protections. But they still were unroaded, which, roads bring with them a lot of different detriments when it comes to like wildlife or experience or ecosystem impact, stuff like that. The Forest Service has nearly 400,000 miles of roads that it has created so far, which I believe makes it one of the largest road managers in the world, I think is what I remember hearing. So a tremendous amount of road construction they've done to this point. But in 2001, a rule was created called the Roadless Rule, which had been advocated for a whole bunch of decades leading up to that, basically saying, all right, these last chunks of forest lands that we have, national forests, that do not have roads yet, let's keep those last places unroaded, because we already have 400,000 miles of other roads crisscrossing and carving all this other stuff. Let's leave these last few places in a slightly more protected place so that, yes, there are, hundreds of millions of acres of lands that are accessible by road, that are developed, that are utilized for resource extraction or easy access, recreation, hunting, fishing, all those kinds of things. But this 60 million acre chunk, we will have in this state. We'll let this area remain in this unroaded state so that you do have that kind of experience, and those places still, available for wildlife that do not respond well to roads, typically like grizzly bears, elk, all these things would prefer to be in unroaded areas. So since 2001, we've had that, and it is, these are the places that many of us love. These are the places that many of us hike into for elk hunting or backcountry fishing trips, or
specifically look for on the map.
Yeah, these are the spots. Like if you are a diehard elk hunter or mule deer hunter or anything like that, these are usually the best of the best. And as of yesterday, now the administration has announced that they are going to remove the roadless rule, and open up this nearly 60 million acres to new road development and all of the other things that come with that. It's a huge deal. I don't think a lot of people understand that, but this is almost like saying we're going to roll back the Wilderness Act, because the roadless rule has created, to some degree, a close approximation to wilderness for 60 million acres. And removing that is a massive thing that I'm not sure the average everyday person is aware of, because it just doesn't get talked about a lot. But I sure hope folks learn about it now, because this is a big one.
It is a big one. It is a big one. And do you know where we're at on that? I know there's going to be like, and already are, a lot of lawsuits on this announcement, but I'm not clear on whether or not like we have a chance to comment yet, other than, asking our senators and representatives to push back on this again.
So I'm not 100% on this, but my assumption would be that, right, the announcement came out yesterday. I believe they're going to have to put some text around this, which then will have to be eventually released to the public register. And once it's released to the public register, I think it has to be open to comment. So at some point, there will be a public comment period on this proposed rule change. We'll have an opportunity to weigh in. Now, to what degree they take our comments into account, that's questionable. But at least there will be a chance to weigh in on this. And then, yes, I think there's going to be a lot of litigation. I think there'll be some orgs suing on this one. But because it is an administrative action, like an executive administrative action, this isn't anything that Congress can help us stop or anything like that. This is the administration wants to do this thing. They're going to start changing the rule. They're going to propose it. They're going to put it out there, and then unless the court system can stop it, it'll happen.
Yep. Old Secretary Burgum and Secretary Rollins. I'd like to see their plan. Like, have they thought about this one? Are they familiar with what it is? Do they know? The why. Like, tell me the why. Obviously, we use a lot of timber in our lives too. I'm going to need the math on what exists in these areas. The juice and the squeeze argument. Just to put it in context, right?
Oh yeah. Well, we've been down this road before. If you look at what happened in the 1800s and early 1900s, when there were no guardrails on, taking wildlife and selling it, or developing mines or oil fields, or logging timber, or doing any of these, when there were not regulations, when there weren't some kind of guardrails in place, some kind of moderation in place, what happened? It's the tragedy of the commons is what folks refer to it as. We use this stuff till it's gone. Everyone races to get their piece, and it ends up decimated. That's why we lost passenger pigeons. That's why we almost lost buffalo. That's why so many of our wildlife populations came just to the very brink, because a quote unquote Wild West, as we kind of know of it now, like an unregulated, race to take, that doesn't work in the long term. And now what folks seem to be trying to do.
In the 1960s and 1970s, when much of this 400,000 miles of road was built, it was the government that built those roads for the timber companies.
Right.
In order to make it profitable enough for the timber companies to go in and harvest that timber.
True.
Right. And here in the era of Doge, and something that we talk about on fire management is it's like, the free market's going to take care of that. So is the free market going to protect us from the fact that you can't maintain a road into these areas and extract the timber and make it pencil out? Because we know for damn sure, living here in Montana, that this idea of people taking unmarketable fuels out of the forest in the name of wildfire management is something that you pay for, not get paid to do. right? Like there's no market here in the West for the products that you get for timber that's under 4 inches in diameter and brush. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't. Again, I need somebody to explain it to me. Mark, you got time for one more thought?
Yeah.
Yep.
You want my thought, or you have a question for me?
No, I want your thought here. Like, let's end on positive. What do you suggest folks do?
I think the one big positive from this whole thing is something we talked towards the beginning, which is despite all of this news, despite a handful of knuckleheads who want to tear this thing down that we have, it does seem that we still have a voice, especially when we work across parties, when we work across demographics, when we work across, recreation type of choice, when the hunters and the hikers and the Democrats and the Republicans and the environmentalists and the conservationists and the Montanans and the Massachusetts folks, when we can, realize that we really care about 90% of the same things and we work together towards protecting or advocating for those things, we do have some say still. We can still be heard. We can put the fire to the feet of some of these folks who continue to push some of these, short-term gain ideas that will hurt us in the long term. I think that it proves that our phone calls, our emails, our messages, our visits to the Capitol or to the state Capitol, or our signs that we hold up in front of the Capitol building, whatever it is, it all can help. It all can make a difference. And we just got to keep on keeping on. This isn't going to be like, oh, we won it today. This is going to be, I think, something we're going to have to continue pounding on for a while. But it is not fruitless. It is not hopeless. We can make a difference, and we are, and we can keep on doing so if we keep it up.
Well said, man. Well said. We got to wrap it up. I'll just throw in, if you're waiting to play party politics by weighing in on an election cycle, you're basically saying that you're willing to give up everything until that election cycle starts. So if you're not participating right now, you're just a bum in my eyes, and you're not invested. That's the reality where we're at. Like your conservation stamp is a great thing. Paying for your licenses and tags is a great thing. But right now, it's not enough. You got to use your voice too. Show up, play your part, make phone calls, make those staffers and those senators and representatives' offices know your voice and like you, so they become an advocate for you. It's not that hard. They're real people, such as you are. And start playing in this game. You owe it to yourself and everybody around you if you really, really do give a shit. So also hit the old BHA Action Alert Center. We've got, as of this recording, over 100,000 people that have clicked that button and either called or emailed their representative or senator. And being able to point to those numbers is tremendously valuable when you're up there lobbying on the Hill. So I appreciate you. As per usual, write in to ASKCAL. That's AskCal at themeateater.com. Let me know what's going on in your neck of the woods. If you got something good to say on this one for old Mark Kenyon, you can hit him up directly, or you can hit me up and we'll have him back on this show to address those questions. Thanks again. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks, Mark.